From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
It was 5 sessions of torture, starting with 2 with slaps and kicks and threats. It was 2 particular sessions of torture that was very devastating, which a plastic bag was placed over my head. I was punched and kicked.
Torture in Chicago. Former police commander John Burge, accused of overseeing the torture of more than 100 African-American men, goes on trial today. He's accused of lying when he denied in a civil lawsuit that he and other detectives had abused any suspects. He faces 45 years in prison. We'll go to Chicago to speak with a man who's suing the police for, he says, torturing him into a false murder confession, and with an attorney who's represented dozens of torture victims. Then the Japanese Prime Minister has sparked outrage for deciding to keep an American base on Okinawa.
They live very, very close to the military base. It's not an isolated location. The military base is here, and they have to find places where they could build their houses. It affects in many ways of their lives.
We'll speak with 3 island activists fighting militarization on Japan, Guam, and Hawaii. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. South Korean President Lee Myung-bak says his nation will sever nearly all trade ties with North Korea to punish the North for what he called the deliberate sinking of a South Korean warship 2 months ago. South Korea also plans to block North Korean merchant ships from using South Korean sea lanes. U.S. diplomats said the situation on the Korean peninsula is one of the gravest threats to Northeast Asian security in decades. President Barack Obama has directed the U.S. military to coordinate with South Korea to ensure readiness and deter future aggression from North Korea. The South Korean defense minister outlined plans for future U.S.-South Korean military exercises.
We are planning on holding a South Korea-U.S. combined anti-submarine training exercise in the West Sea in the near future. It will serve as an opportunity to focus on the enhancement of our defensive tactics against underwater attacks by North Korea and our surface firing capabilities.
Federal prosecutors have decided not to bring charges against any executives from AIG for their roles leading up to the company's collapse in 2008. The Justice Department had been considering charging Joseph Cassano and other top AIG officers. Cassano was the chief executive of AIG's financial products unit, which made huge bets on risky mortgage securities. In other financial news, a total of 775 banks, or 1/10 of all U.S. banks, are now on the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation's list of problem institutions. The number of banks in trouble has jumped by 500 since 2008. Regulators have closed 73 banks so far this year. A federal appeals court has ruled that prisoners held in an American-run jail in Afghanistan cannot challenge their confinement in federal court. The ruling impacts hundreds of prisoners held at Bagram Air Base, including men who were captured in other countries and then transported to Afghanistan. Tina Foster, an attorney for the detainees, criticized the decision. She said, quote, "This is an extremely disturbing precedent that allows the U.S. government to kidnap someone from any part of the world and never have to justify it, ever." The British oil company BP has rejected demands from the Obama administration to use less toxic chemical dispersants to break up the massive spill in the Gulf of Mexico. Over the past month, BP has used about 715,000 gallons of the chemical Corexit made by the Illinois-based company Nalco. The chemical's banned in Britain, and scientists have questioned its safety as well as effectiveness compared to other dispersants. Last week, the Environmental Protection Agency ordered BP to switch chemical, but BP is now fighting that order. The dispute between the EPA and BP highlights the power the oil company has been granted in controlling the cleanup of the spill. Coast Guard Commandant Admiral Thad Allen was questioned on CNN about BP.
They say, why is BP in control now? They don't trust BP. So why is BP in control of this?
I don't think it's an issue of control. This is what makes this an unprecedented, anomalous event is access to the discharge site. is controlled by the technology that was used for the drilling, which is owned by the private sector. They have the eyes and ears that are down there. They are necessarily the modality by which this is going to get solved. Our responsibility is to conduct proper oversight to make sure they do that.
On Sunday, Interior Secretary Ken Salazar visited the Houston Command Center, where scientists for BP and the government have been working to plug the blown-out well.
I am angry and I am frustrated that BP has been unable to stop this well from leaking and to stop the pollution from spreading. We are 33 days into this effort, and deadline after deadline has been missed.
Meanwhile, President Obama has created a bipartisan commission to investigate the oil spill disaster. Heading the probe will be Democrat Bob Graham, former U.S. Senator and Florida governor, and Republican William Riley, a former Environmental Protection Agency administrator.
If the laws on our books are inadequate to prevent such an oil spill, or if we didn't enforce those laws, I want to know it. I want to know what worked and what didn't work in our response to the disaster, and where oversight of the oil and gas industry broke down. We know, for example, that a cozy relationship between oil and gas companies and the agencies that regulate them has long been a source of concern.
In related news, the New York Times reports in the days since President Obama announced a moratorium on permits for drilling new offshore oil wells, at least 7 new permits for various types of drilling and 5 environmental waivers have been granted. While the Obama administration's handling of the oil spill faces increasing scrutiny, Kentucky's Republican Senate nominee Rand Paul weighed in on the oil spill on Friday. During an appearance on ABC's Good Morning America, Rand Paul accused President Obama of being un-American for criticizing BP's actions in the Gulf.
What I don't like from the president's administration is this sort of, I'll put my boot heel on the throat of BP. I think that sounds really un-American in his criticism of business. I've heard nothing from BP about not paying for the spill, and I think it's part of this sort of blame game society in the sense that it's always got to be someone's fault, and instead of the fact that maybe sometimes accidents happen. I mean, we had a mining accident that was very tragic, and I've met a lot of these miners and their families. They're very brave people to do a dangerous job, but then we come in and it's always someone's fault. Maybe sometimes accidents happen.
Dr. Paul's comment came just days after he criticized the Civil Rights Act of 1964 for banning segregation in private businesses. Shortly after the Good Morning America interview, Rand Paul canceled his scheduled appearance on NBC's Meet the Press. Politico reports Karl Rove, the former top advisor to George W. Bush, called Paul's campaign manager and said the candidate was hurting himself with all the media exposure. According to Meet the Press, only 2 other people have canceled appearances on the program, Louis Farrakhan and the Saudi prince Bandar bin Sultan. Meanwhile, in Kentucky, Republican leaders gathered Saturday for the first time since Tuesday's primary. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky urged all Republicans to back Dr. Paul in the general election.
The only way you make public policy in this country is to win general elections. Right. And that's why we're here today, to send a clear and unmistakable message to every Republican in Kentucky that we're going to elect Dr. Rand Paul to the United States Senate.
The United Nations peacekeeping mission in Haiti has launched an investigation into reports that Haitian police shot dead at least 12 unarmed prisoners soon after the January earthquake. The killings took place in an overcrowded jail in Les Cayes, Haiti's 3rd largest city. In Detroit, nearly 1,000 mourners gathered Saturday for the funeral of 7-year-old Ayanna Jones, who was shot dead by police in her own home. The Reverend Al Sharpton traveled to Detroit to deliver the eulogy. The 2 men accused of shooting dead a pair of police officers in Arkansas last week have been tied to the far right-wing Patriot movement. Police say Jerry Ralph Kane and his 16-year-old Joseph shot dead the officers on Thursday. The 2 Kanes were later killed in a firefight with other law enforcement officials. Authorities say the older Kane had been involved since at least 2002 in the Patriot or sovereign citizen movement that believe the government has no legitimate authority. The car Jerry Kane was driving was registered to property that is owned by an aging white supremacist. The Republican-dominated